When we think of American history, the mind often goes to tales of independence, the fight for freedom, World War II, and the American Revolution. Yet, there is much more to America's past than these celebrated events. Behind its current status as the world's most powerful nation, there lies a deeply troubled history. Among these dark chapters is the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, a harrowing episode in which Native Americans were brutally killed by American soldiers. This painful moment reveals a sobering truth about America's past that demands our attention. Join us as we uncover hidden stories, shedding light on a long-buried part of history. Together, we'll explore the events that led to what many consider a genocidal attack on Native Americans. The story begins with the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851, a moment that was supposed to resolve land disputes among settlers and native tribes, such as the Arapaho and Cheyenne. However, it did little to prevent escalating tensions. In 1858, the Pikes Peak Gold Rush spurred a new wave of European settlers into Colorado, exacerbating conflicts and fueling a ruthless competition for land and resources. Just 3 years later, in 1861, 6 Cheyenne and 4 Arapaho chiefs signed the Treaty of Fort Wise, relinquishing much of the territory they were granted under the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Cheyenne leaders like Black Kettle, White Antelope, and Little Wolf, alongside Arapaho chiefs including Little Raven and Left Hand, took part in this decision. But their actions were not universally accepted. They faced scorn and threats from their own people, especially from the Dog Soldiers, a fierce Cheyenne military group. The Treaty of Fort Wise ultimately reduced the lands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho to a fraction of what they once held, fueling even more resentment. Many tribespeople, feeling betrayed, rejected the agreement and refused to comply with its terms. The Council of 44, the highest governing body of the Cheyenne, never ratified the treaty, symbolizing the deep divides that the U.S. government's policies inflicted upon Native American communities. The Cheyenne continued their lives as hunters in the bison-rich plains of western Kansas and eastern Colorado. However, with the surge of white settlers cutting through their territory, particularly along the Smoky Hill River in Kansas, tensions escalated. This fresh route to the gold mines provoked a growing hostility among the Cheyenne. Those opposed to the Treaty of Fort Wise argued that it was signed by only a handful of leaders, without the broader tribe's consent. They believed these signatories had been tricked with gifts and had little understanding of the treaty's true consequences. In response, authorities labeled the non-compliant native groups as hostile, convinced they were plotting an uprising. By 1861, some Cheyenne had begun committing minor acts of resistance, which escalated over time without repercussion. Seeing this rising unrest, Agent Samuel Laurie urged Governor John Evans to negotiate with the Cheyenne again in 1863. Evans arranged to meet the tribal chiefs, but they didn't appear at the appointed spot. Elbridge Gerry, serving as the governor's guide, was dispatched to locate them. He returned 2 weeks later, reporting that the chiefs had held their own council and opted not to meet with Governor Evans. Rumors soon swirled of an alliance forming among the Plains tribes to resist the settlers, with talk of a coalition between the Sioux, Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. By the spring and summer of 1864, these tribes were engaged in a fierce struggle against each other and the encroaching settlers, resulting in civilian deaths, the destruction of livestock and crops, and a grave risk of starvation or violence for settlers in Colorado. Without attempting further negotiation, soldiers from the 1st Colorado Cavalry ambushed a group of Cheyenne at Fraser's Orchard on April 12, 1864. The next day, a report emerged that Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors had driven away 60 oxen and 12 horses and mules from a camp south of Denver. Among those witnessing these escalating tensions was George Bent, a man of both Cheyenne and white descent, who would later survive the tragic Sand Creek Massacre that followed. According to Bent, some Cheyenne from a nearby camp were out hunting one day in April when they stumbled upon a herd of oxen wandering through the sandhills. Unsure of who owned them, they brought the cattle back to camp, intending to return them when the owner appeared. That winter, the buffalo were plentiful, so they had little use for tame meat. In response, Lieutenant Clark Dunn sent a small group of soldiers to reclaim the cattle. In the skirmish that followed, 4 soldiers lost their lives, and the Cheyenne retained the cattle. Subsequently, Lieutenant George Eyre was dispatched with orders to retrieve the animals, and to attack if they refused to surrender them. When Eyre's group received word that Crow Chief's band was nearby, they ransacked a nearby camp, looting and burning it without following protocol for negotiation. They soon did the same to Chief Coon's band, who had abandoned their camp after being warned of Eyre's approach. Then, on May 16, 1864, less than 15 months after visiting President Lincoln in Washington, D.C., Lean Bear and other Cheyenne leaders were camped near Ash Creek. Confident that this would be a peaceful encounter, Lean Bear rode out to meet the soldiers, displaying his peace medal from Lincoln and an official document attesting to his goodwill. Unbeknownst to him, Colonel John M. Chivington had already instructed Eyre's men to kill Cheyennes wherever they found them. Despite Lean Bear's gestures of peace, he was shot and fell from his horse, after which soldiers continued to fire at his body. As tensions mounted, attacks by Cheyenne warriors increased, including the infamous Hun Gate Massacre on June 11. The Civil War had diverted federal attention away from the region, leaving Colorado Territory vulnerable to escalating violence. By the summer of 1864, attacks on wagon trains, settlers, and villages had become almost a daily occurrence. Settlers began fleeing to larger towns like Denver as they abandoned their homes. In response to the unrest, John Evans, who had been appointed the second governor of Colorado by President Abraham Lincoln in 1861, tried various measures to calm the situation. He called for federal intervention, initiated talks with native leaders, and established camps throughout the territory. However, all efforts failed to bring peace. The collapse of Evans' attempts at reconciliation ultimately led to the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, a tragic and brutal chapter that continues to haunt American history. On the morning of November 29, 1864, several prominent Cheyenne and Arapaho chiefs, including Black Kettle, Big Man, Yellow Wolf, Warbonnet, Bear Man, One Eye, Spotted Crow, and Gray Beard, also known as Wolf Gray, alongside Little Bear, were camped along Sand Creek, approximately 40 miles north of Fort Leon. They were accompanied by about 750 men, women, and children from the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Despite years of struggle, land disputes continued between the Native Americans and the encroaching settlers, who had restricted them to small parcels of their traditional hunting grounds. For years, the Cheyenne and Arapaho had faced tremendous hardship as the settlers advanced, forcing them to endure violent mistreatment and ongoing boundary conflicts. In an effort to secure peace and protect their people, the chiefs had engaged in negotiations, culminating in the Treaty of Fort Laramie. This agreement was intended to allocate land in the Great Plains to these tribes, providing them with a safe space to live and maintain their hunting practices, an integral part of their way of life before the arrival of Europeans. However, as the tensions of 1864 continued to rise, Colorado's Governor John Evans issued a proclamation at the start of the summer, instructing all friendly Cheyenne and Arapaho to gather at Fort Leon. He promised them safety and supplies if they complied, hoping this would diffuse the escalating hostilities. Tragically, this call for peace would soon be overshadowed by the events that followed, a massacre that would forever scar the history of the Plains tribes and the United States. As fate would have it, a standing order was issued to massacre any Native Americans who approached Fort Leon, in a desperate attempt to protect his people from the violence of the settlers' military. Chief Black Kettle of the Cheyenne tribe sought out Major Edward Wynkoop at Fort Leon to negotiate peace. Black Kettle's hope was that, through successful diplomacy, his people and those of the Arapaho might regain a semblance of the freedom they once knew before European settlers encroached on their lands. Yet, as he faced Governor Evans, Wynkoop, and Colonel John Chivington, fear filled his heart. He sensed that something far worse might befall his people, and his hopes began to waver. Governor Evans then directed Wynkoop to order the Cheyenne and Arapaho to camp near Fort Leon until negotiations were complete and a designated area could be arranged for them. Following these instructions, Black Kettle and his people, some 750 Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly elderly, women, and children, camped along Sand Creek. There, they awaited the supplies and protection promised by the governor, hoping for a peaceful resolution. Tragically, at dawn on November 29, 1864, American soldiers from the 1st Colorado Infantry and the 2nd Colorado Cavalry, led by Colonel Chivington, arrived from the southwest. Chivington had been ordered not to leave until the task was done. Around 6:30 a.m., as the camp was just waking, the soldiers opened fire, catching the Cheyenne and Arapaho completely off guard. Bullets tore through the encampment, and the air filled with chaos and bloodshed. While some Cheyenne and Arapaho managed to escape, about 230 were killed in the massacre, including many elders, women, and children. The soldiers did not stop there. Reports describe horrific atrocities committed against the bodies of the dead, with soldiers mutilating corpses and even taking body parts as gruesome trophies. After the massacre, Chivington and his men lingered in the area until December 1st, after which Chivington returned to Denver, boasting of a victory over hostile Native Americans. In the following months, the United States government conducted investigations to uncover the truth of what happened at Sand Creek. In 1865, the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War, a congressional panel, condemned the massacre as a foul and dastardly attack, rejecting Chivington's claim that it had been a legitimate military engagement. The U.S. Army's investigation, led by Major General Samuel Ryan Curtis, also denounced Chivington and his men, uncovering the full scope of their brutality. Public outrage over the massacre was widespread, and Chivington's reputation, as well as that of Governor Evans, was permanently scarred. Though Chivington never faced prosecution for his actions, he lived the rest of his life in disgrace, haunted by the atrocities he had committed against the Cheyenne and Arapaho people. In response to this dark chapter, the U.S. government implemented policy changes aimed at fostering peace among European settlers, Native Americans, and itself. President Ulysses S. Grant's peace policy, launched during his administration, sought to promote peaceful relations across America, particularly with Native tribes. Sadly, no one was truly held accountable for the Sand Creek Massacre. Colonel John Chivington, responsible for the horrendous attack on unarmed civilians, faced only public criticism rather than prosecution. Governor John Evans, widely believed to have ordered the massacre, was also never convicted of any involvement, though the intense backlash ultimately led to his removal from office. In 1867, the pursuit of peace led to the signing of the Medicine Lodge Treaty. This agreement, made between the U.S. government and various Southern Plains tribes, including the Cheyenne and Arapaho, was intended to resolve land disputes and establish reservations in present-day Oklahoma. Although Colonel Chivington lived in disgrace and died in 1894, the repercussions of the massacre lingered. For the Cheyenne and Arapaho, it marked a profound betrayal and left deep scars across Native communities. The Sand Creek Massacre stands as a testament to the brutality Native Americans faced, as well as the deep-seated trauma it caused. This tragic event left an indelible mark on the history of the United States, casting a long shadow over the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Many survivors were forced to leave their homes, starting anew in unfamiliar lands, forever haunted by memories of the massacre. Efforts at reconciliation fell short, as trust in the U.S. government eroded and Native Americans' sense of betrayal ran deep. Even though some settlers justified the massacre as self-defense, these false claims were eventually debunked. Testimonies from soldiers like Captain Silas Soule, who courageously rode to Congress in 1865, shed light on the horrors they witnessed. He described women and children begging for mercy, only to be mercilessly killed by soldiers who claimed to be civilized. A century later, additional letters from Lieutenant Joseph Kramer and Captain Soule were discovered, further revealing the barbarity of the event. Many soldiers had even defied orders to carry out the massacre, moved by conscience to protect the innocent. In 2007, as a gesture of reconciliation, the U.S. government established the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site to honor the victims and educate future generations about this tragic event. This site stands as a reminder of the violence that once darkened the plains and serves as a tribute to the resilience of Native American tribes. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content that delves into the untold stories of history. We'll see you in the next video.